They found Joe Masseria face down in a Coney Island restaurant in April of 1931. 4 bullets. A hand of cards still spread on the table. The killers were gone before anyone called the police. Nobody saw a thing. Nobody ever did. That single afternoon changed the architecture of American crime forever. Because the men who ordered that hit didn't just eliminate a rival. They built something in his place. Something with rules, rituals, and a reach that would stretch across 8 decades and into the highest offices in the country. Something called Cosa Nostra. Our thing. And this is the story of how a secret brotherhood of Sicilian immigrants became the most powerful criminal organization in American history, and how they ruled from the shadows for so long that most people still don't fully understand what they actually were. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe right now. New episodes every week. Hit the bell so you never miss. The year is 1919. America is loud, broke, and hungry. The First World War has just ended, and millions of men have come home to cities that can't absorb them. In the tenements of Lower Manhattan, in the back alleys of Chicago, in the crowded ports of New Orleans, immigrant communities from southern Italy and Sicily are stacking on top of each other, 3 families to a room, working brutal hours for almost nothing. The government is about to make it all worse. In 1920, Prohibition arrives, the nationwide ban on alcohol, and in one stroke, it hands the underground economy the most profitable product in human history. Overnight, the demand for beer, wine, and whiskey doesn't disappear. It moves into basements, warehouses, and the trunks of black sedans. Whoever controls the supply controls everything. And the men who understood this first were not politicians. They were Sicilians who had already been running parallel systems of power for generations back home. They knew how to operate in the dark. They had been doing it their whole lives. Cosa Nostra, literally our thing in Sicilian, did not arrive in America fully formed. It evolved out of older Sicilian traditions of clan loyalty and extortion, transplanted to New York and Chicago and Philadelphia through waves of immigration in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The early gangs were chaotic, violent, and constantly at war with each other. Bosses rose and fell by the gun. There was money, but no system. That changed with one man. Salvatore Lucania, known to history as Lucky Luciano, was born in Sicily in 1987 and raised on the streets of Manhattan's Lower East Side. By his 20s, he was one of the most feared operators in New York. But what separated Luciano from every other gangster of his generation wasn't his violence. It was his mind. He thought in structures, not just power. He saw that the constant warfare between Italian gangs was destroying profits and attracting federal attention. He wanted something that could last. After the murder of Masseria, which Luciano himself orchestrated, he convened a historic meeting in 1931. Bosses from across the country gathered in Chicago. What emerged was the Commission, a governing body that would oversee disputes, approve major decisions, and coordinate between the 5 families of New York and their allies in other cities. No more freelance wars. No more chaos. From this point forward, Cosa Nostra operated like a corporation with an enforcement division. The structure was elegant in its simplicity. At the top sat the boss, the underboss beneath him, then the consigliere as advisor, then capos who each commanded crews of 10 to 20 soldiers, the made men. Below them, a vast network of associates who did the work but were never fully in. Entry required: Italian or Sicilian heritage, a murder committed as proof of loyalty, and an oath taken over a burning saint's card. You pricked your finger. You held the flame. You swore on your blood that Cosa Nostra came before family, before God, before your own life. And you never broke omerta, the code of silence, under any circumstances. Not for money, not to save yourself, not ever. At its peak in the 1950s and 60s, Cosa Nostra controlled garbage collection, construction, garment manufacturing, the docks of New York, and the Teamsters Union, which gave them indirect leverage over trucking across the entire country. Their annual income is estimated at anywhere between $30 billion and $50 billion in today's money. They had judges. They had senators. They had the ear of people who ran. When Robert Kennedy launched his war on organized crime as Attorney General in the early 1960s, he told Congress there were over 5,000 made members of Cosa Nostra operating across the United States. 5,000 men who had sworn a blood oath and answered to a parallel government that most Americans didn't even believe existed. Then came the moment that broke everything open. In October of 1957, a state trooper in the small town of Apalachin, New York, noticed an unusual number of expensive cars parked outside the estate of a local mobster named Joseph Barbara. He called for backup and set up a roadblock. Over 60 mob bosses from across the country tried to flee through the woods in their expensive suits. Dozens were arrested. The meeting had been called to discuss leadership succession after the attempted murder of Frank Costello and the actual murder of Albert Anastasia weeks earlier. For the first time, federal law enforcement had undeniable physical proof that a national criminal organization existed. The myth of the Mafia, which the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover had publicly denied for years, became undeniable fact in a single afternoon. The unraveling was slow, but total. The RICO Act of 1970 introduced a legal weapon that changed everything. Prosecutors could now charge an entire organization for the crimes of its members, not just the individual who pulled the trigger. Through the 1980s, a wave of prosecutions dismantled the five families one by one. The most devastating blow came in 1986, when the Mafia Commission Trial saw the bosses of all five New York families convicted simultaneously. Hundreds of years of combined prison sentences. The heads of the organization gone in a single verdict. And then came the informant. Joe Valachi in the 1960s was the first made member ever to testify publicly about Cosa Nostra. He named names, described rituals, drew organizational charts. Henry Hill talked in 1980. Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, underboss of the Gambino family, admitted to 19 murders and testified against John Gotti in 1992. The code of silence, the sacred unbreakable omerta, broke. Not once, not twice, hundreds of times, as men faced life sentences and chose survival over loyalty. The foundation of the entire organization crumbled from the inside. What remains today is a shadow of what existed. The five families still operate in New York, but their power is fractional. The commission hasn't functioned in any meaningful way since the indictments of the 80s. The construction rackets are gone. The union power is gone. The political connections are a fraction of. Law enforcement estimates fewer than a few hundred active MAID members remain in the United States, compared to the thousands Luciano's generation commanded. But here is what Cosa Nostra left behind that cannot be dismantled by any court. It left a template. The structure Luciano designed in 1931, the hierarchy, the buffers, the code of silence, the combination of legitimate business with criminal enterprise, became the operational model for organized crime groups around the world. The cartels studied it. The Russian Bratva adapted pieces of it. The street gangs of Chicago and Los Angeles built informal versions of it. Even in its decline, Cosa Nostra is the grammar that organized crime still speaks. They ruled America's underworld for 80 years not because they were the most violent. There were always more violent men. They ruled because they built something that violence alone could never build. A system. A code. A culture so total that men died rather than betray it. And in the end, it wasn't the FBI that truly broke them. It was time, prosperity, and the simple human desire to survive prison. The oath burned over a saint's card meant everything, until it meant less than 30 years in a federal cell. Some empires don't fall. They just run out of men willing to burn. They just run out of men willing to burn.